Hey there, drone fans. Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to discuss the DJI Spark, but more importantly, the intelligent battery systems that power that quad. I know a lot of you out there have questions about the right way to charge, store, and transport this battery pack, so hopefully the details I provide in this clip will answer those questions for you and give you all the information you need to take the very best care possible of the cells you already own. Now for starters, DJI refers to this as an intelligent flight battery, and for good reason. It's not like a marketing term they came up with to sell you more batteries. They've actually designed a very sophisticated controller that sits inside this tiny little package and takes responsibility for a lot of the functions that take place in this battery on a regular basis. So that controller governs the charging cycle, which means it's not only charging the cells internally, but it's balancing that charge across the 3 LiPo cells that's contained inside the case. It controls the discharge rate. It keeps track of how many times the battery's been charged, the temperature the battery is operating at. If the battery has an error condition that occurs, that controller will step in and try to correct for that error condition. It'll take note of it. It'll report it upstream through the application so you know exactly what's going on with your battery. If you're using a goofy charger and you overcharge this thing or try to overcharge it, that controller steps in and stops that inrush of current to protect the cells. It'll also protect against a short circuit. So if you short out the connections, you won't blow up a battery. So there's a lot of really brainy things going on inside this battery. The minute you turn it on, over a dozen functions spring into action to protect the battery. While it's doing that though, and this is pretty amazing, it's having a very aggressive conversation with the quad. So it's telling the quad its current charge, its discharge rate, all the important information, the temperature that the quad needs to know to make predictions on how far you can actually fly it. Because remember, the quad's responsible for not letting you fly past that point of no return and keeping enough reserve power in the battery to get you back. And it's making adjustments based on your current flying conditions. So there's a lot of smarts going on in the conversation between the two, but it all starts with an intelligent flight battery like this one. So what I'm going to do in this clip is spend a lot of time talking about how the battery operates, explaining what the LEDs do on the front, and I'm going to break the clip into about 5 or 6 parts because there's a lot of information that's really important to know. And to be fair, LiPo cells, lithium polymer cells, which are contained inside here, the chemistry of those are very, very delicate. And you can do a couple of things that aren't so smart that'll dramatically reduce the lifespan of the battery. So a couple of mistakes that you could make early on when you first start charging and using the battery could take that battery from maybe 500 or 1,000 charge cycles and reduce that by half or a third. And these are not cheap batteries. They're about 50 bucks for a battery. So I'm a cheap guy and I want to make sure that if I'm spending 50 bucks on a battery, I get as much useful life out of that battery as possible. So knowing some of the stuff I'm going to tell you today will extend the useful life of that battery and kind of keep you from replacing the battery well before you should. So the different sections I'm going to cover are things like good things to do with the battery, things you can do to flatter it, and bad things you never want to do with the batteries. Then I'll talk a little bit about the temperature, because one of the biggest mistakes I see other pilots make is that they either operate it in the wrong temperatures or they charge it in the wrong temperatures, both of which can really damage the battery. Then I'll talk about the LEDs, what they can report, and there's a lot of information they'll give you beyond just how charged that battery is at that particular point. Then I'll talk about some tips and tricks about the batteries. I've spent a lot of time flying the quad, this particular quad, and a bunch of other quads from DJI that have that intelligent battery in them. And there's some tips and tricks on how you can get a little longer flight times out of them and how to protect them, especially like in cold weather conditions, things like that. The next section will cover what I'll call interesting bits. There are some accessories coming out for this Spark in the next couple of months that you may be aware of, maybe you aren't, but I'll explain what those are. I'll also try and explain what these magical little squares on the bottom are. There's been a lot of controversy about what those are used for. And then the last part of it, I'll talk about accessories that you can use with the batteries. Now, it may seem ridiculous to think that you'd need accessories for something this small, but there are a couple of key accessories I use with my batteries to protect them, especially during transport, that guarantees that they're going to be safely transported from one site to another, and they'll be ready for use next time. So I'll go through some of those accessories, maybe things you want to add to your kit, maybe not, it's up to you guys, but I feel like to do this clip correctly, I've got to at least include some accessories and what I use to protect the cells. So it is a bit of a long clip. I'll put some time sequences up front, so if you want to jump forward to one of the sections, you can check the comments below. But I can't rush through this because there's a lot of really good information. And again, this is an expensive purchase. I want to make sure that you understand everything you need to know about this battery, how it functions, and how to take really good care of it so you get the longest useful life out of it possible. So anyway, stay tuned and I'll get into it in a second. In this first section, I'll provide a brief overview of the intelligent flight battery for the DJI Spark, as well as its specifications. Before I get into those details, I'd like to recommend you review 2 manuals that are available for the quad as well. The first one is the user's guide for the Spark, which has an entire chapter on the battery and its technology. And the second one is the safety guidelines manual for the intelligent flight battery, which packs a lot of detail into its pages about exactly how to charge it, how to store it, and how to transport it. So let's get into the overview. First thing you'll notice when you pick up the battery is the hard exterior that this battery is constructed of. And you might think that was an accident, but that was really a design decision by DJI to make this battery incredibly durable and incredibly safe. Now, when I say safe, what I mean by that is inside this case is the intelligent controller that I referred to in the first section, and I'll spend some more time talking about that later on. But the second thing inside of here are 3 individual lipo cells. And if you're not familiar with lithium polymer chemistry, it's unlike NiCad technology or other type of battery technologies in that that chemical mixture, if exposed to air or exposed to water under certain conditions, can spontaneously combust. And a lipo fire, even though it's a rare event, is an incredibly violent event. So when that fire starts, it burns hot, it burns fast, and it's almost impossible to put out. So the last thing you want is one of these batteries to burst into flames. The way you do that and the way you protect against that is to put it inside of a really hard exterior to prevent sharp things from piercing those lipo cells. So good on DJI for doing that. All right, the next thing you'll notice is the button on the front. Now, if you've flown the quad, you know what the button is there for. You basically tap it once and hold it, and that fires up the battery. Once those lights come on, the voltages are available across these connectors on the bottom to power up the quad. To turn it off, you do the same thing. You tap it once and hold it. You basically see it strobe down, and you know it's off. If I look at the top of the battery, you'll notice a series of connections along here. That's where the battery connects to the actual quad and provides the power to fly that quad. Now, what's interesting about that connector is you'll notice there are 6 connections there. And you think to yourself, why do you need 6 connections? All I need is a positive and a negative to supply the voltage to the quad. And even if I use 2 connections for the positive and 2 connections for the negative to give me multiple paths of current through this, why do I need those extra connections? Those are there for the intelligence that the battery transmits all the information about what's going on inside itself to the quad. So those are data links that actually make a connection to the quad to provide that intelligence. If I flip the battery over, on the bottom I've got 2 feet, which act as landing gear for the actual quad, and I've got 4 gold mysterious pads over here, and I'll spend some time talking about those in a later section, but those are charging pads. Now, there is no way to charge the quad through those pads yet, but there are accessories coming that'll actually allow you to do that. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about was sort of the mounting of this thing. You've got 2 grips on the side, which release 2 fingers on top that hold it into the quad. I really like this mounting because either of these independently will actually hold the battery in the quad. So the fact that I've got 2 of them means there's a certain elemental redundancy built into the battery that if one of these fails in flight or during takeoff or landing or when you put the battery in, the other one should be strong enough to actually hold the battery in the quad because the battery itself is a single point of failure. And if this wasn't fully seated in the quad and worked itself loose and that connection was broke, that quad's coming down out of the sky. So the fact that these operate independently is a really good thing because that guarantees that when I've got it locked in, again, even if one of them fails, the other one's going to hold on to it. All right, so let's get into the specifications of the battery. So the battery itself is an 11.4 volt DC battery, and it can supply 1480 milliampere hours of power. So there's a lot of energy packed into this battery. If you do the math on that, that's 16.87 watt hours of energy inside the battery. So it's small enough to actually take on a plane. There's going to be no problems with restrictions, but it's small enough to slide in your pocket. That amount of power will guarantee 16 minutes of flight time on an average afternoon with a Spark, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. Now, what I find interesting is that 11.4 number, this is for you nerds out there, the 11.4 number is not standard. It should be 11.1 because what's called a nominal voltage across the standard LiPo cell, and inside here there are 3 LiPo cells. It's known as a LiPo 3S because each of those cells is wired in series. That's what the S is for. Each of those individual cells typically has a 3.7 volt nominal charge on it. So if you add those up, you multiply that times 3 because there's 3 of them, it should be 11.1. But it's 11.4. So I think what's happening is DJI is saying our nominal voltage is 3.8 volts, which gives you the 11.4 volts. Again, it's not that big a difference, but I just found it curious that they went with the 11.4. So that's pretty much it for the specifications. It's a very light battery. And again, I'm blown away by the fact that a small battery like this can provide enough flight time on that Spark of 16 minutes. All the while it's doing GPS coordination, it's doing telemetry information, it's broadcasting video back from the camera, it's maintaining an RF connection between it and a remote control or over Wi-Fi to your phone. That's an incredible piece of technology right there. And honestly, it's an engineering marvel from my perspective. So stay tuned and we'll get into more details in a second. In this section, I'd like to cover some of the best practices for charging, storing, and transporting your Spark batteries. Now, I've broken this into two categories. One I call good things. The other category is obviously bad things. Now, the good things are suggestions for the best way you can care for your batteries to get the longest useful life out of those cells. The bad things are maybe mistakes you can make with your battery that you're not even aware of that can severely reduce the life of that cell. And all I really care about is that these batteries are expensive, and whatever I can do to help you get the longest useful life out of it, maybe another 20 or 30 flights out of the quad, just by doing a couple of simple things, is really what I'm trying to get across in this section. So let me get started with the good things. So for starters, even though these batteries are very durable, they're somewhat fragile. And what I mean by that is you've got to keep them dry and you've got to keep them protected. So when you're transporting them, you should have a bag you carry them in so they're not rolling around the back of your car and getting dinged up. The other thing that's really important, and I've seen a lot of pilots make this mistake, if you're out flying for the day and you're excited, you want to get the quad back up and you've got multiple batteries, one of the worst things you can do is take the battery out of the quad, drop it on the ground, pop another battery in and start flying, because if this lands on the ground upside down, you're going to get a ton of dirt and debris, you'll get moisture on it, especially if it gets up inside the connectors on the end, because not only will it damage the battery because it introduces contaminants and corrosion and all kinds of bad things here, but if you then take that battery and slide it into your charger or slide it back into the quad, you're going to transfer those contaminants onto the connectors inside the quad, and that's a whole lot more expensive a mistake. So keep it dry and keep it clean. I suggest dropping it in a bag when you're in the field. It takes an extra second to drop it in like a lipo bag or some kind of storage bag, or even back into the case that you brought along with your quad. So do that. Another mistake a lot of pilots make, and I see this happen on a regular basis when I'm out in the field, is you want to make sure that if you're taking a battery out of your quad, maybe you've got 2 or 3 batteries with you, and obviously we all want to fly as long as we can, you don't want to take the battery out of the quad and immediately start charging it, because you have to remember, and I'll go over this pretty extensively in the next section, there's a safe temperature range for charging, and when you pull the battery out of the quad, it's already been up in the air, you're flying during the day, so the sun's beating down on the quad's getting hot, that battery's hot, and I'll bet you that battery is well outside of the comfortable range for charging. So a big mistake would be to take it and immediately try to charge it up so you can use it again when you're done flying with the battery that's in the quad. Always give it some time. My rule of thumb is when I land, I typically let a battery rest for as long as it was in flight. So in this case, it's about 15 minutes of flight time. If I pull a battery out of it, I'll let that battery I just pull out sit on the mat for at least 15 minutes before I put it in the charger. Now I carry 3 batteries, so that works out pretty well where I can fly, pull the battery out, let it sit, and I've got another battery to put back in the quad. But make sure you let it cool down. You don't want to put it on the charger too quickly after you've landed. Another thing you can do to take care of these things, and this is super important, is the lipo cells inside here don't like to retain a charge for a long period of time. So it's not really a good idea to keep them fully charged and keep them in the case in case you decide you want to run out in the field and start flying. The way I usually handle that is I'll fly through my batteries for the day, and when I get towards the end of the day, I'll take those depleted batteries, put them back in the case, and bring them home like that. And I won't charge them. I'll let them sit in that case. That's really important because it allows the lipo cells to sort of calm down between flights. When you're ready to fly, what I'll do that morning, or maybe even the night before, is I'll charge the batteries knowing I'm going to fly the next day, or even the morning I'm going out to fly. And that way they've got a fresh charge on them, the lipo cells are ready to go, and I'm going to get the best useful life out of those batteries. Then the last thing I'll say about good behavior is, again, the temperature. These are extremely temperature dependent. So the chemistry behind lithium polymer is very resistant to being charged in cold temperatures or in very hot temperatures. And even if it charges, it's not going to charge fully. Or like I said before, some of the air conditions where you don't have an even charge across all the cells, that'll typically happen when you're trying to charge a cell that's too hot or too cold. So know what the temperature limits are. They're not hard limits. I mean, you can get close to the edge of those limits and still be okay. But if it's a really hot day, don't charge those cells until they cool down. Get them in the shade. Or if it's too hot to even charge them in the shade, don't charge those cells, because that extra flight you might get out of it can really, really damage that battery and might severely reduce the amount of charge that it'll hold next time or the amount of times you can charge it. All right, so a couple of bad things. You have to watch these batteries over time. By that I mean you're looking for signs of damage. Now that could be a gouge in the side, it could be a cracked corner, but more importantly, if you have a cell that's swollen on any of its soft sides, like the top, or this bottom part, if you notice any bulging or swelling, and again, you can feel your cell and know if it's got a bulge in it. If you see any kind of swelling, cracks, or bulging, you have to get rid of the cell. And it isn't just a matter of maybe I'll fly with it a couple more times. a cell that's got a bulge in it means that the chemistry inside is starting to disintegrate. You're going to have issues with that battery. And it's not so much that the battery itself may burst into flames, which is scary enough. It's the fact that that battery could fail completely. It could go dead on you when your quad's up in the air 350 feet. So as much pain as it's going to cause you to throw out a battery that may still look like it takes a charge, isn't reporting any kind of error conditions, the minute I see a cell have a bulge on it, I get rid of that cell. And that'll typically happen because the cells have been stored improperly. So where I see that happen a lot is when I'm flying with new pilots that want to take their quad everywhere. So they've got it in a case, they've got it in their car, and it's always in their car because they're thinking, I'm driving around for the afternoon, I might find a beautiful location, I want to put the quad up. The mistake there is that that car can get incredibly hot, especially in the trunk. You've got the sun baking down on it. It's like a little pizza oven in there. That'll damage these cells very, very quickly. So as much as I love the fact that I've got my quad with me when I need it, I don't leave it in the car, especially overnight. I'll take it in the house, I'll put it in a cool place. When I'm going out the next day, I'll charge it, put it in the car, and typically I'll put it behind or under a seat so it's not in direct sunlight. So just be aware that if you see bulging on the cells, you've got to get rid of those cells. Another mistake that people make, and this can be pretty dramatic as far as an impact on the cells, is when you land the quad to switch out batteries, power down the quad. Do not pull a battery out of a quad live, slap another battery in that quad. That's a huge mistake. That's something you don't want to do because it not only can screw up the cells themselves, it can mess up the cells inside the batteries. It also can cause arcing between the connections. And I'll show you what those connections look like in a later part of this clip. But if you unclip it and then smack another one in there, you're going to have that huge inrush of current. You might get spiking. You could get all kinds of issues inside the quad. But it also doesn't give the quad a chance to wake up. And I know this sounds ridiculous, but during the power on sequence, the quad kind of electronically introduces itself to the battery and they have a conversation about, hey, welcome on board, you're new, I don't know you yet, and they're exchanging all kinds of information. If you slap a cell in there, it's a violent introduction is all I can say. So don't do that. Make sure that when you land the quad, take the extra 15 seconds it takes to turn the battery off, let it sit a second or two, pull the battery out, put the new battery in and turn it on. That just gives the quad sort of a chance to wake up with a new cell and understand exactly what's going on with the cell. Another thing that you can do would be bad, and this is a small concern, but it's something I don't really take a chance with, is I'd mentioned before how lipo cells have the chance, and it's a small one, but there is a chance that during charging especially, they could have some malfunctions that would cause a fire. Now again, it's small. We don't hear a lot about lipo fires. If you read the boards, there probably aren't any stories about batteries bursting into flames. But it could happen. So my suggestion would be, don't charge the cells unattended. What I do when I charge my cells is I have the chargers in the office. When I know I'm going to spend 15, 30 minutes charging some cells up, I have them sort of out of the corner of my eye. I actually have them in lipo bags with the end opened up. So God forbid something does happen with a cell, at least it's somewhat contained in one of those fireproof bags. And I know I sound like a real overly concerned guy about this, but again, I cannot stress just how violent a lipo fire is. You're not going to be able to put it out. It's going to catch things on fire in your house. It is a very, very, it's like a grease fire squared. It's that bad. So you don't want to have that happen in your house. If you're watching the cells and they're at least in the corner of your eye or in the room with them, you'll hear things happening if they're going bad. You may even smell something. You may see smoke or something, and you can react to that. If you plug these in, leave them on a counter and leave the room, you don't know what's going to happen with those cells. So I know it sounds ultra conservative, but don't charge these cells unattended. And then the last thing is, you want to make sure that you protect these connections. And I'll show you some accessories, Dion, that'll help you do that. But these connections down the bottom here are kind of like magnets for stuff, right? They're sharp and they're edgy. So if you just throw this in the back of your car and you've got carpeting, you'll get fuzz up inside there. If you throw them down on the ground, I guarantee you're going to get dirt and debris in there. And if these contacts get dirty, even though the battery seems like it works when you plug it into your quad, if you get any kind of contamination on there, electrically, that surface can no longer conduct electricity the way it could before. It can't deliver the full current because that debris acts as like an insulator on there. So now there are parts of it that are making contact, parts that aren't making contact. You'll transfer that debris over to the connections on the quad, and maybe now you've got isolation on the quad and isolation on the battery. So it's just going to cause a ton of problems, and they're not apparent. It's not like you're going to know it immediately because it's not going to be working and not working. It's just not going to work as well. So you could have issues with your quad. So I'm going to show you some accessories at the end. You can slide over the end of the battery, the little rubber piece that fits over the connectors. That'll completely keep it dry. Again, I transport these in lipo safety bags, which are fireproof bags that are custom made for these quad batteries, especially the Spark batteries. And I'll put some links below where you can get a look at them. And I know that, again, sounds conservative, but if you want to do this right, you're spending a lot of money on your quad. You want to keep it safe. You want to keep it as long as you can. But more importantly, I've got $150 sitting on the table here in batteries. I want these guys to be the best value possible and use them as long as I can. So these best practices I'm telling you are things that will guarantee that you do these things right, these batteries are going to give you a ton more flight time. And I'll be honest, I made a lot of mistakes with my first quad. I read the manuals and I thought, they're just being conservative. I'm just going to charge them when I want. I'm going to take care of them, but who cares, if they get banged up in the back of the car. And I found myself replacing batteries a lot sooner than I expected. So if you follow these steps, hopefully you'll have a really useful and long life out of your battery cells. Earlier in the clip, I talked about the intelligence inside the battery and how the brains inside here keep track of a lot of different things that are going on with the battery. How the cells are charging, how many times it's been charged, all kinds of error conditions that may crop up inside the battery. Now the brains inside here is relaying that information to the quad, which you'll be able to extract through the application. And I'll show you that in a section of the clip coming up. But it also wants to talk to you through the battery, through these LEDs. So those LEDs up top are a great way to figure out what's going on with the cell pretty much at a glance. Now I know all of you know that if you tap that, the first time you tap it, it'll show you what the current charge of the cell is. And right now this one's pretty low. But when you put it on the charger, you can also use those LEDs to see exactly how it's being filled up with power, right? So you can see how many are lit up, how close you are to a full charge. Those LEDs can also be used for error conditions. So if the battery has a problem and it wants to report that problem to you, it'll report it through those LEDs. Now I'm going to put 3 charts up that actually detail what those LEDs mean. And I'll also put a diagram up now that shows you the order of the LEDs. So just kind of keep track of the fact that they're labeled 1 through 4, and then you can use the charts that I'm going to show you now to gauge what those LEDs mean. So the first one I'm going to show you is the charging chart. And this is pretty straightforward. So when it's on the charger, you're seeing those LEDs light up as you charge it. And again, the 4 different fill levels it can be at, for lack of a better term. 0 to 50, 50 to 75, 75 to 100, and then fully charged, they're all off. So that gives you a real good feel for how much longer you have to wait while that charge is taking place. When you have the battery ready to put it in the quad, you can tap it once like I did there a second ago, and you'll see the LEDs light up. Now there's a much greater gradation of difference between these two. I think most of us just look at how many are lit up. There's 4 LEDs, so if I see 3 of them lit up, I know I'm around 75% ready to go, left in the battery. So that chart will give you a much more granular look at what those charge levels are, but I think most of us, again, pretty much just divide it by the LED count. This last chart I'm showing you is the error condition chart, and this is really important because I'd mentioned before the battery does a really good job of protecting you for things like overcurrent or short circuits, or if you've got some kind of wonky thing going on with your power supply, it tries to overcharge it. And these LEDs will let you know that. So when you look at this chart, you'll see LED number 2 deals with both overcurrent and short circuit, and those are kind of the same things, right? Overcurrent means you're trying to pull too much energy out of the battery and it's worried that you've got some kind of short, and then a short circuit means you've got some of the connections on the end of the battery short circuited, and that can happen, as I mentioned earlier, if it got wet or you've got debris in there. LED 3 pretty much deals with over voltage or overcharging. So if you're in the middle of a charge or using a car charger or maybe a third-party charger that hasn't been tested by DJI, those LEDs might blink. And then if that happens, you'll know exactly that it's an overcharging or an over temperature, or I should say an over voltage condition. And then LED 4 deals with the temperature. And that's one that's really important to watch, because if you're out in the wintertime, I know a lot of us love to go out, especially after a fresh snowfall, and put a quad up and get some beautiful shots of the landscape. You have to be really careful that if that thing is blinking twice per second, you know that it's too cold to fly. And I'll give you some tricks coming up in the next section on how to get around that. But also the other one where it's too high to fly, temperature's too high. And that may be an afternoon on a beach, or maybe you've been out flying for the day and you're on your 17th battery, and maybe it's just gotten too hot for the thing to fly. Just be aware of those conditions. Now, most of those error conditions you can clear. Some of them you can't clear. A lot of times if you try to recharge the battery, you can do it. If you do a hard reset on the battery, it'll clear some of them. So there's a couple of ways you can get around any of those error conditions that occur, but it's important to understand before you try to fix anything with the batteries exactly what error condition you have, and that chart gives you all the information you need. So hopefully that was helpful for you. And again, all of this is in the manual, but I wanted to take a minute and go through it because I know a lot of us kind of use the battery very quickly to figure out how much of a charge is left, but you may not know about those error conditions that are a good way to get an indication of what's going on with the battery through those LEDs. I'd like to talk a little bit about temperature, because the environmental conditions in which you charge, transport, and store these batteries is easily the biggest factor in how well they'll perform for you and how long they'll last, how many charges they'll take. And it all boils down to the LiPo cell itself, the lithium polymer chemistry, which I'd mentioned before It's got the largest electrical density of any commercial batteries that are on the market today. That's why everybody's using them in their quads, and they're using them for laptops, and they're using them in Teslas, because the amount of electrical power you can store in a battery this size is really unmatched by a lot of other technologies out there. Also, the fact that you can recharge them a bunch of times means you can reuse that chemistry over and over and over again. If you do a few things wrong, like charging them at the wrong temperature or storing them at the wrong temperature, you can abuse that chemistry to the point where it doesn't hold the charge as well. Maybe it doesn't hold a full charge, or it doesn't charge again. So there's a lot of ways this can go wrong. And really all you have to do is kind of keep your eye on 3 important temperatures, and I'll go through those in a minute. Now, these are not hard limits. These are suggested limits, but you don't really want to push them much beyond these limits if you can help it. So first is the use. You can use this battery in conditions, heat conditions, any temperature conditions really, between 0 degrees centigrade and 40 degrees centigrade. And that's a pretty wide range. So most days you're flying, you're not coming anywhere close to that. Where that gets a little bit dangerous is if you're flying for a while, pop another battery in, fly for a while, even though the temperature outside might not exceed that 40 degrees Celsius, because the battery is already warm and the quad's already warm, you really have to check that battery. And that's why I mentioned, and I'll talk about it a little bit coming up, I always check the temperature on my second or third battery before I put the quad up to make sure the actual temperature of the battery is within that range. So again, 0 to 40 degrees centigrade. Now, the next thing you want to be careful of is the charge temperature. And this is a little skinnier. So the charge temperature is between 15 degrees and 40 degrees. So you kind of lose that low end of charging. These get warm in 2 conditions. They get warm when you charge them, so when you're firing electrons at them. They get warm when you're using them, so when you're pulling electrons out of them. The chemistry just goes through that sort of heating condition when it's taking in electrons or releasing electrons. So when you're charging it, you want to make sure you charge it in an area that's well ventilated and it's cool enough to be able to charge it, because it is going to get warm when you're charging it, so be aware of that. The last is storage, and this is where a lot of people make mistakes. You can't store these in a very wide variance of temperature. So they've given you a very restrictive range. I think the specifications call between 22 and 28 degrees Celsius, which that's like an ideal laboratory temperature. I know you're not gonna put them in a hermetically sealed room and keep that temperature exactly there, but kind of shoot for that number. If you're a little warmer, a little cooler, it's not gonna kill the battery, but you definitely don't wanna store these things in a hot garage, or in the wintertime in a cold garage, or heaven forbid in your trunk. I can't tell you how many times I've flown with pilots that should know better. They'll pull their case out of the back of that trunk. It's been in there overnight. We didn't fly early afternoon. Maybe we drove a couple hours to get to the location, and one of their batteries is starting to bulge. And they're just going to curse because they're looking at it going, how could I have not known that? Why didn't I keep it in the car in the back seat? Why did I put it in the car the night before? So that storage temperature is super important. I'd mentioned before that you want to discharge the batteries too. You want to keep them about 30% charge when you're storing them, somewhere around that number. If you store these for a long time, I mentioned earlier in the clip about the controller inside the battery itself. The controller will sit for a while with the battery fully charged, but over the course of several days, if you leave that battery in there, haven't used it, the controller springs into action and actually slowly discharges that battery. While it's discharging the battery is going to get warm. So that's why that temperature of storage is pretty important. I store mine, I have a basement, it's air conditioned, so I keep it in the basement, I keep it in the case, and I keep them in LiFo battery bags so that if, heaven forbid, anything happens, at least I'm trying to contain whatever event took place with those batteries. So again, to cap off, these are not religious numbers. You can do your best to stay close to them, but these are the numbers they specify. So in use, 0 to 40, during charge, 15 to 40, and then in storage, 22 to 28. Try and stick with those numbers, and that'll do the best it can to give you the longest use out of these batteries, and more importantly, the most recharge cycles of the batteries. In this section, I wanted to share a couple of tips and tricks with you that I've developed over the years after flying these quads as much as I have. Now, I'm lucky to have a quad up most days. I fly all over the country with it, and these suggestions I think are great things for you to try with your Spark. So the first one has to do with cold weather flying. A lot of people ask me, can I fly my Spark in the cold? Should I fly it in the cold? Is it a dangerous thing? And what I've noticed is the batteries are super critical when you're flying in the cold. LiPo cells do not like flying in the cold. They don't like waking up, going out into a cold environment and flying. So one way you can help that is to keep the cells somewhat warm. When I'm flying on a cold day and I'm wearing a heavy jacket, I'll take the cells, 3 or 4 of them if I take that many with me, and slide them into the inside pockets in my jacket. And that way they're close to my body, the jacket keeps my body heat in, and it keeps the cells at a really nice ambient temperature so I can take them out of my jacket, slide it in the quad, and get it up and fly it. That's super important because the cells themselves dictate how long and how far you can fly, and if you try to fly with a cold cell, you'll find that your flight distance is decreased incredibly. The other thing I notice in cold weather, and it's been my experience pretty consistently with all the quads that I fly, is that LiPo cells behave normally for the top end of the charge. What I mean by that is if you have 100% charge and you're flying the quad, you can pretty much track in a linear fashion how that charge is degrading, right? So you start at 100%, you fly for a couple of minutes, it goes to 95%, 94%, 93%, and it goes all the way down to 25%, and then you bring it back and land the quad. When you're flying in the cold, what I find, especially with lipos, is at the top end of the spectrum, maybe 60% to 100%, I get that linear degradation of that charge all the way down to about 60%. When I get to 60 or 50%, I found that it can go from 50% to 30% very quickly with no steps in between, and that can be a panic moment. And I think it has to do with the battery being up in the air, that cold air hitting it, and again, the chemistry in the lipo cell not liking that, and the charge just isn't there any longer. The lipo cell gives up that charge. But my experience has been when I'm flying in the cold, I fly it normally till I get to about a 60% rate on the charge. Then I start watching it very closely, and I make sure that I'm not really far away when I'm at that 50% mark, because normally if I am, I've got plenty of time to get back. But I've had occasions where it's at 50%, immediately drops to 30%, and then I'm in a panic mode because it's a half a mile away. So just be aware that when you're flying, you may not have that happen on every battery you've got, but just keep that in mind, and when you're flying your quad, if it happens to you, then you'll know what it's all about. All right, the next thing is, you've got to protect these battery connections. One of the biggest problems I've seen in the field is just treating these in a laissez-faire fashion. Again, throwing them in the bag, throwing them in the back of the car. Any kind of debris that gets in the end down here is going to damage the battery. It's going to degrade its ability to take a charge and deliver that charge back to the quad in a reasonable fashion. So keep those clean. I don't mean get in there and clean them out with a Q-tip or anything like that. I just feel like if they're in the quad, that's great. Whenever they're out of the quad, they're exposed. You got to really be careful. And if it's a rainy day or it's a messy day, or even in the winter, you're out in the snow and there's a lot of debris out there, you've got to protect those end caps. Now, again, I'll show you at the end a couple of accessories. There's a battery guard that slides over the end that completely isolates these from the outside, so that'll protect them pretty well. One other thing I'll mention is if you get error conditions on your batteries, especially if you get like an overcurrent error or an over temperature error, if you try to charge it in too hot or too cold a temperature, you may try and clear that by putting it back on your charger. In a lot of cases, that'll reset the battery. There is a way to hard reset the battery, and I'll mention this is different than a standard lipo cell. I've talked before about the intelligent controller that's inside this battery. The lipo cells inside here are protected by that controller, and what I mean by that is one of the hard rules of lipo cells is you never want to discharge them completely. So if you're using a naked lipo cell on some of the quads that are out there, if you let that charge go to zero, there is no zombie effect. There's no getting that battery back. Typically, if it's gone to zero, it's not coming back. These guys can't really go to zero unless you really abuse them. So what I suggest in the way you reset the batteries is if you have an error condition you have to clear, and maybe you're looking at your specs in there and maybe one of the cells is higher than the other two and you want to try and even them out, you can run the quad till it's down to about 5%, land it, and then let it sit there until the battery actually extinguishes all the power that's left in it and it blinks out. And that's called hibernate mode. So once it goes into hibernate mode, it's now at the point where you can reset the battery. That actually resets all the counters inside the battery, and it typically resets the error conditions. Now, that isn't dangerous for the battery because even though it's not coming on, there's still enough charge in that battery, 10% below that, you can't get at, that you can reboot it from there. So the minute that happens, set it aside, let it sit for a couple of minutes, to stabilize, put it on the charger, and that will force all those counters to reset, typically clear an error condition, and allow you to charge it back up. And when I've had conditions where maybe I've got one cell, maybe I broke the rules and charged it too hot or too cold, and one of the cells didn't fully charge, doing that hard reset on the battery took care of that problem for me, reset those cells back to zero, and they all charged back up equally. So give that a shot. The next thing I'll talk about is the batteries themselves. If you store them charged, the batteries don't like that, right? So the controller I'd mentioned before does a lot of functions around protecting you against bad things. One of the things it's going to protect you against is keeping a full charge on the battery. So if you leave these in your case fully charged over a period of a couple of days, the controller kicks in and starts discharging that battery. So it's going to slowly discharge that battery to 60, 50%. And when it does that, it's going to get warm. You want to make sure when you store these that you don't force it to go through that routine. Not that it hurts the battery, but leaving that chemistry charged all the time is not a healthy thing for that lithium polymer cell. So when I said before about how I typically fly is I'll fly them, get it down to 30%, and then store them at about that 30% for a couple of days. That's the best way to keep these batteries healthy. The dangerous thing is if you don't fly your quads that often. Maybe you're excited about the hobby, the couple of weeks you're flying it, then you get busy with work or you get busy with the family and you put the case aside. If you don't visit those batteries often, and what I mean by that is I don't mean you have to go in there and talk to the batteries, but you've got to charge them. So every now and then, at least once a month, you've got to get in there, charge the batteries, use the quad, then put it aside. If you forget to do that, the charge can decay to the point where it drops below that reserve of 10% inside the battery, and then you have discharged the internal lipos to the point where they can't be recharged. So if you've got a bunch of different quads, you've got to make sure you charge those batteries every so often, because it's a healthy thing to have the battery remember that it can be charged and discharged on a regular basis, or the chemistry kind of forgets, right? So you could damage the batteries by letting them sit idle too long. So I'll use the term again, you've got to visit your batteries at least once a month. Take them out of the case, make sure they're clean, charge them, fly the quad for a little bit, and then put them away. So that was pretty much the last suggestion I had. These are things, again, that I've learned over the years that have helped me really extend the life of the batteries that I use. Hopefully you find them useful and you can put them into practice when you're out flying. One of the best ways to both manage and monitor your Spark batteries is through the DJI Go4 application, which provides a tremendous amount of information about your battery's current health and its history. To access this portion of the application, start on the main page. On the upper right hand corner, you'll notice 3 dots. When you tap those dots, it brings up the general settings page. Along the left hand edge, there are a series of icons, and about 2/3 of the way down, you'll notice one that looks like a battery. When you tap that, it brings up the aircraft battery page. Now there's a lot of information on this page, but there are 2 details you want to pay attention to. I'll start in the upper left. You'll notice 3 green bars. Those represent the current status of charging across the individual cells inside the battery. Below that are the voltage across those cells. Now that's an important detail because you always want to check to make sure that those cells are equally charged. Normally that happens because the charger and the intelligence inside the battery do their best to balance out those charges. If you happen to notice that one of those cells isn't quite as fully charged as the other 2, that could be an indication that there's a problem with the battery. More often than not, that happens because you charge the battery in an environment that's too hot or too cold, and it'll correct itself the next time you charge the battery. But if you notice one of those cells is dramatically different than the other 2, take note of that and check that the next time you charge your batteries to make sure that it's come back. To the right of that is the voltage across all 3 cells, and to the right of that is the actual temperature of the battery. And that's another important metric because even though you may be flying on a day where it's not that hot, if you're flying with the sun beating down on the quad and maybe you're on your 2nd or 3rd battery, the quad itself generates a lot of heat, so the battery can actually be warmer than the outside ambient temperature. So you want to make sure that the temperature doesn't exceed a safe operating temperature for the quad. Below that, you've got the remaining power in the battery against the total capacity in the battery. The next metric to the right is the number of times that are charged. Now, that's an important thing to look at because a lot of times people ask me, well, I'm buying a used quad and the guy told me he only flew it a couple of times. Well, that times charged indicator lets you know how many times that battery's actually been charged and used and charged again, and that's a real good indication of how often that quad has been flown. Nobody's charging batteries to not fly a quad, so if you see that battery's been charged 175 times and someone's telling you that they hardly ever use the quad, you know those 2 things don't line up. Below that is the low battery warning threshold. Now what this setting means, and it's adjustable, is this is exactly when your remote is going to start yelling at you about a low battery warning. And because the Spark has a fairly short flight time, I usually crank this down a little bit further. It comes from the factory at 30%, which means I'm going to fly through 70% of the battery, then my remote's going to start yelling at me to bring the quad back and land. Now honestly, you don't want to fly the quad too far away when you're getting low on battery power because you always want to have enough to get it back and land it safely, but I think 30% is pretty conservative. So I normally take that down to 20 or 25%. I'm totally comfortable there, knowing that as I'm watching my battery levels decline, I get it closer to home so I can land it if I have to. Below that is the flight time on the batteries. Then the last thing is the serial number of the battery. I know I'm a bit nerdy, but I write that serial number down in case I ever lose my batteries, or if I'm flying with other pilots and we're swapping batteries back and forth, I want to make sure that I get the batteries back that I came there with. So that serial number gives me a real good indicator of exactly what that battery is, and is it mine or is it somebody else's. So that's pretty much everything on this page. And again, the 2 things I keep my eye on are the voltages across the batteries and the temperature. Those 2 are critical pieces of information that when I put a quad up, I don't check it every time, but I'm flying in afternoons full of flights, I may check it a couple of times when I put that quad up. This section is called Interesting Bits, and it's where I get a chance to dive a little bit deeper into the engineering and the electronics behind a particular product. Now, since we're focusing on the Spark battery in this clip, I thought I'll limit my conversations to just the cell, but I am working on a larger clip that goes into greater detail on the quad that I'll be posting very soon, so make sure you stop back to the channel and check that out. Now, as an engineer, I spend an awful lot of time around technology, and one of my favorite things to do with a brand new toy is to tear it apart. Ever since I was a kid, I'd love to tear stuff apart, have it in pieces all over the table, and then go at it with a magnifying glass and a flashlight to look inside that product to figure out exactly how it was built. And as I got older, I realized there's procedures and process behind the engineering, so I've started to look at things with a very critical eye and looking at every engineering decision they've made with a product to say, does that favor the company or does it favor the consumer? In other words, did they make that choice to make it less expensive so the company makes a bigger profit, or did they make that choice to make it more durable and favor the consumer? And I've taken a lot of DJI products apart, and I can tell you without exception, their engineering team sweats the details. They really build a product that favors the consumer. It's built to be more durable, more long-lasting. There's redundancies built in. There's error correction mechanisms built in. And all of that's inside this battery. And a lot of those details would be lost at first glance. So I think I'll point a couple out that hopefully prove my point. So the first thing I'll talk about is the connections down here for the battery. Now, when you think about a battery for a quad, the battery really has one function. It provides consistent power to the quad to keep it up in the air, and that's it. And to do that, a battery only needs two connections. So most of the less expensive quads that you're plugging a LiPo cell into have two connections. They have a ground and a positive connection. In this case, it's ground and 11.4 volts. So I would only need two big honking connections on the end to make that quad fly. But if you look closely at this under a magnifying glass, and I'll put a diagram of it up in a second, you notice there are 6 connections. So if I'm a really conservative engineer, I'm going to design this thing to have maybe 2 negatives and 2 positives, because if one of those gets compromised, I've still got the other one to provide the power. So I'm not going to lose power and have the thing fall out of the sky. But that's 4 connections. Would I really need 3 of them? So I took a voltmeter out and started checking the thing out. And again, the diagram will show that. What you've got are 2 negative connections, 2 positive connections, which deliver the 11.4 volts, and those are across both of the grounds. So it doesn't matter which one of the 2 I lose, I can still deliver consistent power to the quad. And the 2 outside connections are data connections. And those data connections are for transferring information about what the controller inside the battery is seeing happen as it's flying. So it's looking for error conditions, cell health, amount of capacity that's left, and it's relaying all that information to the quad so the quad can make an intelligent decision about how far it can fly and when it has to trigger the return to home. So they've not only built this thing to be redundant from a power perspective, but they built it to be conversational, for lack of a better term, to let the quad know exactly what's going on inside this amazing little power bank. So pretty cool. One other small detail you may miss on there, and again, I've got a diagram up, you'll notice that the pins that make the connections are not all at the same level. So you got to think about that and say, well, why would they have all of them be the same level except for 2 of them? Why are those sticking up way further? And you'll see if you look at the diagram again that those are ground connections. And a good engineering practice is to have the ground connection made first. So whenever you're connecting a power source up, especially a battery, you want the grounds to connect first, because if any kind of static electricity builds up in the battery or any kind of errant charges on the battery, it'll ground first and it'll drive that excess of current or that static electricity to ground, and it won't damage the sensitive electronics. So it makes ground connection first, then positive connection, and the data at the same time. So again, small detail, big engineering thoughts behind that. All right, the next thing I want to talk about are these mysterious little gold boxes on the bottom of this thing, right? There's been a lot of speculation about what those are. Are they wireless charging? Are they some type of charging connections? And I, again, with the voltmeter, could not find any direct connectivity between the power connections on the battery and these connections on the bottom. So when I did a little more investigation, there turns out to be a couple of things coming out. These aren't out yet as far as accessories go, but I did go to the kickoff show in New York City, and they had a couple of examples there, and I'll put a picture up in a minute. They're coming out with a portable charger. It's like a charging case for it, where when this thing sits in the case, there are connections that come up from inside the case that touch those connections on the bottom, and they'll actively charge the battery. That charging case will support the quad with a battery in it, and 2 batteries to either side of it. Now, I wasn't really clear because they didn't have it plugged in as to whether that had its own LiPo cell in it that would then charge the batteries, or if that actually had to be plugged in to charge the batteries. So we'll have to wait and see where that comes. But what's interesting about this is that you're not making connections to the battery. So how does that work? Is that a wireless inductive charging? I don't think so. But even still, I'd have to isolate these, because if that was a direct connection to the battery, every time I turned it on, I could short those out and cause major problems with the battery. So there has to be some type of circuitry, probably part of the controller internally, and I haven't torn one of these apart yet, but I will, that limits this as an input-only current. In other words, it's never going to present current back. And there's probably some kind of diode network or some intelligent switching in there that allows it to charge through there, but not present that voltage back out to those connections. So again, it's a small little device, and to build in all these wonderful engineering choices and decisions, there was probably a team of wizards working on this somewhere in the bowels of DJI to put together the battery, and they're never going to get credit for it. So again, as frustrating as it is to be a wizard in that laboratory, for you guys to use this and not think through, well, that was pretty cool, and all those little things Rick just talked about were amazing, and then they built this in, and they haven't even really talked about this yet. Must be frustrating as hell for those guys, but I'm here to say, if they're watching, you did a great job with the battery. I love the fact that you've made the negative connections higher, so you're discharging all that static. I get why you built the redundancy in. I can't wait to see what these things are used for, and again, I don't know if they're inductive charging or direct connect charging. We'll know very shortly. As soon as that accessory comes out, I'll have one, I'll test it and tear it apart, but all that stuff is packed into this tiny little package, which again, its only basic function is to power the quad. But for them to spend the time to build the intelligent controller, to protect the cells, to deliver a decent charge and a consistent charge to the quad, and be able to charge it, limit the current, overprotect it, to give you the indications of how it's behaving, to give you this wireless or inductive or even direct connect charging on the bottom. Like, there's a lot of engineering that went into this, and okay, it's a battery, but it's a battery on steroids. It really is a cool device. So in my mind, again, just an engineering marvel. In this last section, I wanted to cover a few of the accessories I use with my Spark batteries to make sure they're protected when I'm storing them and transporting them. The first product is called the battery guard, and it actually slides over the battery connections on the cells themselves, and there's one that fits on the quad. And what it is a custom piece of cut rubber that's designed to slide over those battery connections and really protect them from the outside world. And I'd mentioned how fragile they can be, and if you get dirt or debris in there, it's just going to cause a lot of problems. So I'll typically charge my batteries, slide those battery guards on there, and then when I slide them in a bag, I know that they're protected when I'm traveling with them. They also make one that comes as part of the kit that slides over the connections on the quad, so that way you're protected there and there's no dirt or debris going to get in that. Now, a lot of times you'll transport this with a battery in the quad, so you may not need that one, but I like to keep it on there when I have it at home and I'm charging my batteries, just so I don't get dust up inside there or any kind of debris when I'm laying this thing down. Now, once those battery guards are on there, I still need to be able to carry these somehow safely. If you've got a large case that you got with the quad, if you bought the Flymore kit, you can slide these right inside that case. I also use another bag like this one, which once I have the battery guards on, I can put a couple of the Spark batteries in. What I like so much about this case is I can seal it up so it gives a little bit of water protection to it. It's also got a clip on it so I can clip it on my belt. This is what I use when I'm out flying in cold weather, because I'll clip it typically on a zipper inside my coat, and the batteries can sit in this bag and then it'll stay warm next to my body. If you want to take the next step in protection, you can move to like a lipo protective bag. Now, these lipo protective bags are great because they're fire retardant as well. So they're made of a very special material inside that when the battery's in there, you can slide it down inside, fold these flaps closed, and then seal it. And you've got it inside a case that, heaven forbid something bad happens with the battery or it overheats or it starts to catch fire. This will minimize the amount of damage. It'll contain that combustion inside the bag and won't allow it to spread outside the bag. So these are really handy to, make it a super safe environment. They're also really durable. So when in this bag, if you happen to throw it in your bag and something sharp's in there, this outside material is extremely difficult to pierce. So it's going to keep the battery safe inside of it with the added protection of, the flame retardants. Now they make two models of this. They have a single one. They also make one that's a double one. This will take two of your cells nestled in there very nicely. I've got one of them turned on. Let me actually turn that off. There you go. So two of your cells nestled in there safely. What I'll do is charge them, slide the battery guards on them, and then stick them inside the bag. And I know a lot of you might be looking at this thinking, oh my gosh, you're way too conservative with these batteries, but I really enjoy flying, and anything I can do to protect these things and make them last longer for a $50 investment. Again, I've got $150 between these three batteries sitting on the table. For a couple of bucks to have a lipo battery bag, a couple of battery guards, maybe even a pouch to carry it, like I said, in the cold weather. These are small investments that protect a much bigger investment in the battery. So I've got these available. There are links below. If you want to buy them from us and support the channel, you can. I recommend them because I use them and I find them to be very effective. You can make your own decisions if it's something you want to add to your kit or not, but I like them an awful lot. So that's pretty much all I had for the clip today. I know it was a longer clip than I normally do, but I didn't want to rush through it and skip sections. I wanted to make sure I could give you all the information that I've learned over the years flying with these quads, and particularly with this particular Spark, so that you have the information you need to protect those batteries. My only goal is that I understand the Spark is a lot of fun to fly, batteries are expensive and they're consumable. So if I can help you avoid replacing those batteries too soon and let you keep the batteries you've got and fly longer, that was really the aim of the clip. So hopefully you got the information you needed. I always enjoy putting these clips together. So again, I hope you find value in it. I appreciate the subscription. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please hit the button below and join the team here. We're happy to produce these clips, and we want to make sure you know when we post some new stuff. So that's pretty much it today. Thank you very much again for watching. I really have a lot of fun putting these together. And as I always say, until next time, happy flying.